I signed a non-disclosure agreement so thick it could stop a bullet before they told me what I'd actually be doing. The job posting said, Wildlife Management Specialist, remote location, high pay, discretionary clearance required. I was 3 months behind on child support, and my unemployment had just run out. Questions felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. They flew me to a private airstrip outside Vernal, Utah, a forgotten strip of cracked asphalt surrounded by juniper and sagebrush that smelled like dust and diesel. From there, a white government van drove me 2 hours into the Uinta Basin, past the turnoff for Dinosaur National Monument, past the small towns of Jensen and Ramblet, until the road became gravel and the gravel became packed earth. We reached a ranch that didn't appear on any map I'd ever seen. 12 square miles of scrubland surrounded by chain link topped with concertina wire, the kind you see at maximum security prisons, not cattle operations. The fence posts were sunk deep into concrete footings. Motion sensors blinked red every 30 feet. "Welcome to Site 19, my new boss said as I stepped out of the van. She was a woman in her late 50s named Dr. Ruth Sorensen, and she looked like someone who'd made a career out of insomnia. Deep lines carved her face like dry creek beds, and her eyes held the flat exhaustion of a person who'd seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. Your job is to track and contain biological anomalies that manifest on this property. You'll be issued equipment, a modified rifle, and a partner. You will not leave the property for 6-month rotations. You will not discuss your work with anyone outside the facility. She handed me a laminated card. "And you will follow these protocols exactly," she said, "or you will die. That's not a threat, Mr. Weston. It's a statistical certainty." I looked at the card. 6 rules printed in blocky government font. My partner was a Ute man named David Antelope who'd been working at the ranch for 8 years. He had scars all over his forearms, long parallel marks like something with claws had tried to strip the skin from his bones. "The fence doesn't keep them in," David told me on my first night, his voice low as we stood on the observation platform, watching the sun bleed out over the book cliffs. "It keeps us in with them. They want witnesses. They want us to see them, to know they exist. It's part of whatever twisted game they're playing." He handed me a pair of binoculars and pointed toward the north pasture. "Count the cattle," he said. I pressed the binoculars to my eyes. That was 2 years ago. I'm writing this because someone needs to know what's really happening out here in the Utah desert, and because I don't think I'm going to survive another rotation. I counted the cattle in the north pasture. 43 head of black Angus, all grazing in the fading orange light, their shadows stretching long across the dry grass. "Count them again," David said. I adjusted the binoculars and counted a second time. 43 cows. Same as before. "Again," he insisted. "Slower." I went through a third count, taking my time, tracking each animal from left to right across the pasture. 43 cows, and one shape that looked like a cow but stood perfectly still near the fence line, not eating, not swishing its tail, not doing any of the small, constant movements that living things do. It was facing our tower from half a mile away. Cows don't have forward-facing eyes. They're prey animals. Their eyes sit on the sides of their heads to watch for predators. But this thing's eyes were aimed directly at us, tracking when I shifted my weight on the platform. "That one's been standing there for 6 days," David said, his voice carrying the worn-out tone of someone describing weather. "It looks like a cow. Sounds like one too if you get close enough. But if you approach it, it stands up on 2 legs. And then it's wearing your face." "What happens after that?" "Nobody knows. The people who got close enough to find out aren't around to tell us." David took the binoculars back and hung them on a hook beside the platform railing. "We call them skinwalkers, but that's not really accurate. The Dene have stories about Yineld Lushi, witches who wear animal skins. These things are something older. Something that was here before my people, before anyone. He pulled out a pack of Marlboros and lit one, the flame briefly illuminating the web of scars on his hands. "How many are there?" I asked. "We stopped counting at 20. After that, the number doesn't matter anymore." He exhaled smoke toward the darkening sky. "What matters is learning the protocols." He tapped the laminated card Dr. Sorensen had given me. Rule 1. Never approach any animal that isn't moving. Living things move. They breathe. They twitch. They blink. If something is perfectly still, it's not alive. It's waiting. I looked back at the pasture. The knot cow hadn't moved a millimeter. Rule 2. Between sunset and sunrise, do not respond to any voice calling your name, even if you recognize it. Especially if you recognize it. They learn voices fast. My wife called to me from outside the perimeter fence 3 months after she died in a car accident on Highway 40. His tone stayed flat, like he was reading from a manual. Rule 3. If you see your own reflection where there shouldn't be one, in a window, a puddle, the side of a vehicle, do not look at it for more than 2 seconds. Close your eyes and count to 30. If it's still there when you open them, radio for backup and do not move until help arrives. The sun had fully set now. Emergency lights flickered on around the compound, casting everything in harsh white. Rule 4. The entities cannot enter any structure that has been properly sealed. Every door and window in the compound is lined with a mixture of white ash, salt, and tobacco from the reservation in Fort Duchesne. Check the seals every morning. If you find a gap, report it immediately, and do not enter that building until it's been resealed. David stubbed out his cigarette on the metal railing. Rule 5. If you hear drumming coming from the direction of the old wellhead south of the property, go inside immediately. Lock yourself in the safe room in Building C. Do not come out until dawn, no matter what you hear, no matter who tells you it's safe. "What's at the wellhead?" I asked. David's jaw tightened. "That's where they come from. There was an accident in 1951. Government was running tests out here, deep underground. They punched through into something they shouldn't have." He turned to face me, and in the harsh floodlights, his scars looked like claw marks made by something with too many fingers. Rule 6. If an entity makes direct eye contact with you for longer than 5 seconds, you are marked. You have 72 hours to complete a cleansing ritual, or you become theirs. I'll teach you the ritual tomorrow. Tonight, don't look at anything for too long. From somewhere in the darkness beyond the fence, a cow lowed. A normal sound, the kind you'd hear on any ranch in Utah. Then another cow answered. Then another. Then dozens, all calling at once. A chorus of voices that sounded almost right, but held notes that cattle throats weren't built to produce. David grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the ladder. "Time to go inside," he said. "Welcome to Site 19. The barracks were a converted mobile home from the 1970s, the kind you'd see rusting in trailer parks outside Roosevelt or Duchesne. Someone had bolted steel shutters over every window and reinforced the door with a crossbar that looked like it belonged on a medieval castle. A thin line of grayish-white powder ran along every threshold. The ash and salt mixture David had mentioned. "Don't step on the seal," David said as I crossed into the building. "Don't touch it. Don't disturb it. That line is the only thing between you and what's outside." Inside, the barracks smelled like stale coffee, gun oil, and something faintly chemical. Cleaning solution, maybe, or the residue of whatever rituals they performed here. 2 bunks lined one wall. A small kitchenette occupied the other, and a bank of monitors showed grainy footage from cameras positioned around the property. I dropped my duffel bag on the empty bunk and watched the screens. Most showed nothing but empty pasture and the dark shapes of cattle moving in the night. One camera was pointed at the north fence line, and in the green glow of night vision, I could see the knot cow still standing in the exact same position. "Does it ever move?" I asked. "Sometimes." David was heating water on a propane burner, preparing instant coffee. "Usually when someone new arrives. It's curious about you. They all are." He handed me a chipped mug with the logo of a Vernal auto dealership on the side. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow I'll show you the rest of the compound, teach you the cleansing ritual. Tonight, just stay inside and don't do anything stupid." I tried to sleep. The bunk was uncomfortable, the mattress thin and smelling of whoever had occupied it before me. I kept thinking about what David had said, that his dead wife had called to him from outside the fence. How did that work? Did they read minds, pull memories from the air like radio signals? Or was it something worse? Were the real people somehow trapped inside those things, screaming through borrowed mouths? Around 2 a.m, I gave up on sleep and went to the kitchenette for water. The monitors cast pale light across the cramped space. I stood there drinking from a plastic cup, watching the camera feed cycle through different views of the property. The north pasture. Empty now. The cattle had moved to the shelter of a windbreak near the eastern fence. The main compound. Floodlights illuminating gravel and the hulking shape of Building C, where the safe room was located. The south gate. Chain link and razor wire gleaming under a quarter moon. The old wellhead. I paused with the cup halfway to my lips. The wellhead camera showed a concrete pad surrounded by rusted equipment, pumps and pipes from some long-abandoned drilling operation. In the center of the pad was a metal cap about 6 feet across, sealed with heavy bolts and wrapped in chains that glinted in the moonlight. Something was standing next to it. The figure was tall and thin, proportioned wrong in ways I couldn't quite identify. Its limbs seemed too long for its torso, its head slightly too large for its neck. It was facing away from the camera, looking down at the sealed cap like someone contemplating a locked door. Then it turned around. The night vision made everything green and grainy, but I could see the face clearly enough. It was my face. My exact features, rendered in sickly monochrome, staring directly into the camera lens with an expression I'd never worn. Something between hunger and amusement. I dropped the cup. Water splashed across my boots. The thing on the monitor smiled. Its mouth opened too wide, stretching past the normal boundaries of a human jaw, and inside were rows of teeth that caught the moonlight like wet bone. "David," I said. My voice came out cracked and dry. He was beside me in seconds, awake and alert, with the practiced speed of someone who'd learned to sleep light in dangerous places. "Don't look at it," he said, grabbing my shoulder and turning me away from the screen. Eyes down. Now. "It has my face." "I know. They work fast with new people." He was pulling me toward my bunk, away from the monitors. "Did you make eye contact?" "I don't know. Maybe. It was looking at the camera, and I was looking at the screen. That counts." David's grip tightened. "How long?" I tried to remember. The moment had stretched and compressed in ways that made time meaningless. "A few seconds. 5, maybe. I don't know." David exhaled slowly. Okay, we can work with that. 5 seconds is the threshold. If it was under, you're fine. If it was over, we do the cleansing ritual at dawn and hope it takes." He sat me down on the bunk and crouched in front of me, his scarred hands resting on his knees. "Listen to me, Weston. What you saw out there isn't really you. It's not a copy, not a clone, not your evil twin. It's something that looked at you and decided to wear your shape because it thinks that'll help it get inside your head. It's a lure, like an anglerfish dangling light in dark water. The face is bait, nothing more." "How do you know that?" I asked. "How do you know they're not actually taking something from us, Some piece of who we are? David was quiet for a long moment. The monitors hummed and flickered behind us. I don't, he finally admitted. That's the truth. 8 years I've been out here, and I still don't understand what they really are or what they really want. The protocols keep us alive, but they don't explain anything. Dr. Sorensen and her team study these things, take measurements, run tests. They've got theories about dimensional breaches and quantum consciousness and a bunch of other words that don't mean anything when one of those creatures is wearing your mother's face and asking to be let inside. He stood up and walked to the window, peering through a gap in the steel shutters. All I know is what my grandfather taught me before he died. He was a medicine man, worked with the tribal council on the old stories. He said there are places where the skin of the world gets thin, where things can push through from underneath. He said our ancestors knew about those places and knew to stay away. David turned back to me, his face half-shadowed. In 1951, the government came to the Winta Basin and started drilling. Looking for oil, they said, but they drilled too deep, and they found one of those thin places. They tore it open. He gestured at the walls around us, at the compound beyond. This whole facility exists because someone 60 years ago decided to dig where they shouldn't have, and now we're all stuck cleaning up the mess. From outside, somewhere in the darkness past the floodlights, something called my name. It used my mother's voice. David put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed once. "Don't answer," he said. "It'll stop by dawn." It didn't stop until nearly 4 in the morning. I lay in my bunk with a pillow over my ears, listening to my bed mother beg me to come outside, to help her, to please just open the door. I didn't sleep at all that first night. If you like the stories, please hype the videos from a button like this just above the comment section. It helps the videos to get more reach and perform well. It would take just a few seconds and cost nothing, but would help the channel grow even faster. Thank you. Dawn came slow and gray over the book cliffs, the sky shifting from black to purple to the color of old bruises. David woke me, not that I'd been sleeping, and led me outside to a fire pit behind the barracks. The air was cold and smelled like sage and juniper, and somewhere in the distance a real coyote yipped at the fading stars. "We're doing the cleansing just to be safe," David said, arranging kindling in the pit. "Even if you were under 5 seconds, it doesn't hurt to be certain." He pulled a leather pouch from his jacket and sprinkled dried herbs over the wood, sage, cedar, something else that smelled sharp and medicinal. Then he lit the fire with a wooden match, the old-fashioned kind with the red tip, and the flames caught with a soft whoosh. "This is a simplified version of what my grandfather taught me," David explained. "The full ceremony takes 3 days and requires a proper medicine man, but this works for exposure cases as long as you haven't been fully marked." He handed me a bundle of dried sage tied with red string. "Hold this in the smoke, let it burn a little, then use it to wash the smoke over yourself. Face, chest, arms, legs, every part of your body. While you do it, think about who you are. Your real memories, things that belong to you and no one else." I did as he instructed. The smoke was thick and fragrant, stinging my eyes, filling my lungs with something that tasted like the desert itself. I thought about my daughter, Maya, who was 7 years old and lived with her mother in Salt Lake City. I thought about teaching her to ride a bike in Liberty Park, the way she'd laughed when she finally got her balance. I thought about my father's funeral 3 years ago, standing in the rain at the Orem City Cemetery, feeling like part of me had been buried alongside him. Real memories, things that belonged to me. "Good," David said when I'd finished. "The smoke carries your identity, marks you as human. It makes it harder for them to wear your shape convincingly. Not impossible, but harder." He scattered the ashes and stamped out the remaining embers. "Now I'll show you the rest of this place. Try not to let it get to you." The compound consisted of 7 buildings arranged in a rough circle around a central gravel yard. David walked me through each one, explaining their purposes with the tired familiarity of a tour guide who'd given the same speech 100 times. Building A was administration, Dr. Sorensen's office, file rooms, a small medical bay with equipment that looked 30 years out of date. Building B housed the armory, racks of modified rifles, cases of ammunition with strange symbols etched into the brass, shelves of supplies I didn't recognize, bundles of herbs, jars of salt, bottles of murky liquid that David said was blessed water from a spring on the reservation. Building C was the safe room, a concrete bunker sunk half into the earth with walls 3 feet thick and a single steel door that sealed from the inside. No windows, no cameras, just bare bulbs, canned food, and enough water to last 2 weeks. "If you hear the drumming, this is where you go," David reminded me. "Don't hesitate, don't stop to grab anything, just run." Building D was the research lab. Dr. Sorensen was inside when we entered, standing over a steel table covered with photographs and documents. She looked up as we approached, her eyes bloodshot and ringed with dark circles. "Mr. Weston, I heard you have an eventful first night." Her voice was flat, clinical. "David performed the cleansing?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. We can't afford to lose another specialist so soon after arrival." She turned back to the table, dismissing me with a gesture. "David, show him the observation records. He needs to understand what we're dealing with." The records were kept in filing cabinets along the far wall, hundreds of manila folders organized by date, going back decades. David pulled one from 1987 and opened it on a side table. Inside were photographs, black and white at first, then color as the years progressed. Each photo showed one of the entities in various states of manifestation. Some looked almost human, standing in fields or near buildings, their faces blank and waiting. Others were mid-transformation, their bodies twisted into configurations that made my stomach clench. Limbs bending backward, torsos elongated, mouths stretched into shapes that couldn't produce human speech. "We've documented over 300 individual manifestations since 1951, David said. "Different forms, different behaviors. Some are aggressive, some just watch. A few have tried to communicate, though we've never been able to verify if the communication is genuine or just another lure." One photograph caught my attention. It showed a woman standing near the perimeter fence, her face turned toward the camera. She was smiling, but the smile was wrong, too wide, too fixed, like someone had drawn it on with a marker. "Who is this?" David glanced at the photo and looked away quickly. "Linda Begay. She was a researcher here in 1994. One night she thought she heard her son calling from outside the fence. Her son had died of leukemia 2 years earlier." He paused. "She went outside. We found her body 3 days later, about a mile south of the wellhead. What was left of it. And the thing in the photo? That was taken 6 months after Linda died. It still wears her face sometimes. We see it near the east pasture, usually around the anniversary of her death." I set the photograph down. My hands were trembling slightly, though the morning was warming up. "Why does the government keep this place running?" I asked. "If these things are so dangerous, why not just seal the whole area? Bomb it, bury it, whatever it takes?" David exchanged a look with Dr. Sorensen, who had been listening from across the room. "Show him Building F," she said. Building F was set apart from the others, closer to the southern fence line. Unlike the other structures, it had no windows at all. Just blank concrete walls and a single reinforced door with 3 separate locks. David opened the door, and the smell hit me immediately. Antiseptic and copper, and something organic, something rotten beneath the chemical overlay. Inside was a laboratory more advanced than anything else on the compound. Gleaming equipment, computer terminals, glass containment units lining the walls. And in those units, suspended in cloudy fluid, were pieces of the entities. Tissue samples, bone fragments, what looked like a complete hand, pale and bloated, with fingers that had too many joints. "They're studying them," I said. The realization settled in my gut like a stone. "They've been studying them for 70 years, David replied. trying to understand how they change shape, how they mimic voices, how they know things they shouldn't know. Dr. Sorensen's team thinks there might be military applications, ways to use the entity's abilities for intelligence gathering, infiltration. That's insane. Yes, David's voice was heavy. It is. We left Building F. The morning sun was fully up now, warming the dusty ground, making the compound look almost normal. Just another remote facility in the Utah desert. Then I saw something move near the cattle pen. One of the ranch hands, a young Ute man I hadn't met yet, was walking toward the gate, a bucket of feed in each hand. Behind him, following about 20 feet back, was another figure. It looked exactly like him. Same clothes, same build, same gait. But it cast no shadow in the morning light. "David," I said. He was already moving, pulling a small mirror from his pocket and angling it to catch the sunlight. "Tommy," he shouted, "don't turn around. Keep walking toward the barn." The young man froze. The thing behind him froze too, its head tilting at an angle that made my neck ache just to look at. "Don't turn around," David repeated. "Just walk. We'll handle this." Tommy walked. The thing watched him go, then slowly turned its attention to us. It smiled with Tommy's face, and then it simply wasn't there anymore, gone between one blink and the next, leaving nothing but empty air and the faint smell of copper. David lowered the mirror, his jaw tight. "They're getting bolder," he said. "That's the third daytime manifestation this month." I watched the empty space where the creature had stood. "What does that mean?" David didn't answer. He didn't have to. 3 weeks into my rotation, I started to understand the rhythm of Site 19. Dawn patrols to check the fence line and ash seals. Midday, feeding of the cattle, the real ones, which we tracked with numbered ear tags and daily head counts. Afternoon equipment maintenance and ammunition inventory. Evening lockdown procedures. Nights spent watching monitors and trying not to think about what was watching back. David taught me how to use the modified rifles. The bullets were hollow points filled with a compound he called quickeig, a mixture of silver nitrate, salt, and powdered bone from animals that had died of natural causes on sacred ground. The bullets wouldn't kill the entities. Nothing seemed capable of that. But they could disrupt their physical forms long enough to escape. "Think of it like hitting pause on a video," David explained as we practiced at the range behind Building B. "You're not erasing them. You're just buying yourself time to run." I asked him about the 1951 incident, and he told me what he knew. My grandfather was 23 when it happened. He was working as a surveyor for the county, mapping land boundaries out near Ouray. One night in October, he saw lights in the sky over the basin. Not stars, not planes, something else. Columns of green fire shooting up from the earth, bright enough to see from 30 miles away. We were sitting on ammunition crates, sharing a thermos of coffee as the sun sank toward the horizon. The cattle were settling in for the night, real animals making real sounds, and for a moment it almost felt peaceful. The government said it was a gas pocket ignition. Natural phenomenon. Nothing to worry about. But my grandfather knew people who worked at the drilling site. Ute men from the reservation who needed the money. They told him what really happened. David poured himself more coffee, his eyes distant. The drill punched through into a cavern about 2 miles down. Massive space, bigger than anything that should exist in solid rock. And it wasn't empty. There was something down there, something that had been sealed away for a very long time. When the drill broke through, it woke up. What was it? Nobody knows for certain. The workers who were closest to the breach didn't survive long enough to describe it. But my grandfather's friends said the survivors talked about a sound, a drumming that came up from the hole, rhythmic and deep, like a heartbeat the size of a mountain. Everyone who heard it up close went mad within a week, tore out their own eyes, bit off their own tongues. The ones who lived longer started changing. I thought about Protocol 5, the drumming from the wellhead. That's why we run when we hear it, I said. It's not just a warning. The sound itself is dangerous. David nodded. The entities are just echoes, I think. Fragments of whatever is down there, pushed up through the breach like air bubbles rising through water. The drumming is the real thing, the source. If you hear it clearly, if you let it get inside your head, you become part of it. That night, I heard the drumming for the first time. I was on monitor duty, watching the camera feeds cycle through their rotations, when the speakers crackled with something that wasn't static. A low, pulsing rhythm, so deep I felt it more than heard it, a vibration in my chest, in my teeth, in the base of my skull. For a moment, I just sat there, confused. The sound was almost pleasant, like a lullaby or a meditation track. I found myself leaning closer to the speakers, trying to hear it more clearly. Then David's hand clamped down on my shoulder, and he yanked me out of the chair so hard I nearly fell. Building C now. We ran. The compound was dark except for the emergency lights, and somewhere behind us, the drumming was getting louder. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the ground beneath our feet, from the sky above, from inside my own head. Other staff members were running too. I saw Tommy and 2 researchers whose names I didn't know, all sprinting toward the concrete bunker. Dr. Sorensen was already at the door, punching in the access code with fingers that trembled slightly. Inside, the bunker was cramped and dim. 8 people pressed into a space meant for 6, breathing each other's stale air, listening to the drumming pulse through 3 feet of reinforced concrete like it was cardboard. "It's louder than last time," one of the researchers whispered, a woman in her 30s with short gray hair and nervous eyes. "It's never been this loud." "Quiet," Dr. Sorensen said. Her voice was calm, but I could see sweat beading on her forehead. "Everyone stay quiet and stay still. It will pass." The drumming continued for 2 hours. Sometimes it faded to almost nothing, and I'd start to relax, thinking it was over. Then it would surge back, stronger than before, and I'd feel that strange pull again. The urge to go outside, to find the source, to let the rhythm carry me down into the dark. David sat beside me with his eyes closed, his lips moving silently. A prayer, maybe, or a chant. Something to anchor himself against the sound. When it finally stopped, the silence was so sudden it felt like a physical blow. We sat in the bunker for another hour, waiting, making sure it was truly over. "Is it always like that?" I asked David as we walked back to the barracks. "No." His voice was hoarse. "It's getting worse, more frequent, more intense. Something's changing down there." The next morning, I went to Building A and asked to see the incident reports from the past year. Dr. Sorensen's assistant, a nervous young man from Provo named Garrett Webb, tried to tell me the files were classified. I told him I needed to understand what I was dealing with if I was going to survive my rotation. He gave me access to a redacted version. Even with half the text blacked out, the pattern was clear. Drumming events had increased from twice a year in the 1990s to once a month by 2010. In the past 18 months, there had been 14 separate incidents. Entity manifestations had tripled. 3 staff members had died, and 2 more had been transferred to psychiatric facilities in Salt Lake. And buried in the margins of one report, handwritten in Dr. Sorensen's cramped script, was a note that made my blood feel thick and slow. Containment protocols adjusted per Directive 7. Stress optimization parameters within acceptable range. I didn't know what Directive 7 was, but stress optimization didn't sound like something designed to keep us safe. That evening I found David at the fire pit, burning sage and watching the smoke curl toward the darkening sky. I need to ask you something, I said, sitting down across from him. And I need you to tell me the truth. He looked at me, his scarred face unreadable in the firelight. Do you trust Dr. Sorensen? David was quiet for a long time. The sage crackled and popped, sending sparks spiraling upward. My grandfather used to say that there are two kinds of people who deal with things like this, he finally said. Those who want to protect others from the danger, and those who want to use the danger for their own purposes. Which kind is she? David fed another bundle of sage into the flames. I've been here 8 years, Weston. In that time, I've watched the protocols change 6 times. Every change made things a little more dangerous, a little more unpredictable. And every time, Dr. Sorensen said it was necessary for the research. He met my eyes across the fire. I don't think she wants us to contain these things. I think she wants to see how far they can spread before we break. The fire crackled between us. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled. A real one, I hoped. Then why do you stay? I asked. David's smile was sad and tired. Because if I leave, there's no one left who remembers the old ways. No one left who knows how to actually stop them. He gestured at the compound around us. This facility is built on lies and bad science, but my grandfather's knowledge is real. And someday, I'm going to use it to end this, one way or another. 6 weeks into my rotation, Garrett Webb walked outside the perimeter fence and never came back. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, clear and warm, the kind of autumn day that makes you forget you're living in a nightmare. I was helping Tommy repair a section of fence near the east pasture when we heard shouting from the main compound. By the time we reached Building A small crowd had gathered near the south gate. Dr. Sorensen was there, along with David and 2 of the security staff, older men named Ray Tsinigini and Paul Caloro, who'd been at Site 19 almost as long as David had. He just walked out, Ray was saying, his weathered face tight with confusion. I was on gate duty. He came up, said he needed to check something outside the fence, and before I could stop him, he'd already opened the lock. Did he say what he needed to check? Dr. Sorensen asked. Her voice was calm, almost clinical, like she was conducting an interview rather than responding to an emergency. No, man. He had this look on his face, like he was listening to something. David pushed through the group and grabbed my arm. When did you last see Garrett? I thought back. This morning. He was in Building A, filing reports. Seemed normal. Did he make eye contact with anything? Look at the monitors too long? Anything unusual? I don't know, I wasn't watching him that closely. David cursed under his breath and turned to Dr. Sorensen. We need to send a retrieval team. If he's been marked, we might still have time for the cleansing. Dr. Sorensen checked her watch. It's been 40 minutes since he left the compound. Standard protocol says we wait until nightfall before. Standard protocol will get him killed. David's voice was sharp. You know what happens to marked individuals who stay outside the fence after dark. Something passed across Dr. Sorensen's face, a flicker of calculation that was there and gone so fast, I almost missed it. Then she nodded. Fine. You and Weston take a vehicle. Stay within visual range of the fence. If you don't find him within 2 hours, return to base. We took one of the compound's trucks, a battered Ford with reinforced windows and ash seals painted around every doorframe. David drove while I scanned the scrubland with binoculars, looking for any sign of Garrett's khaki uniform against the brown and gray landscape. What do you think happened to him? I asked. Someone got to him. David's jaw was tight. One of the entities made contact somehow, maybe through a reflection, maybe through the monitors, maybe some way we haven't figured out yet. They planted something in his head, a a compulsion, and he followed it right out the gate. But why? What do they want with him? David didn't answer. He didn't have to. We found Garrett about a mile south of the compound, near an outcropping of red rock that jutted from the desert floor like a broken tooth. He was sitting on a flat stone, his back to us, perfectly still. "Stay in the truck," David said. He grabbed his rifle and stepped out slowly, keeping the vehicle between himself and Garrett's motionless form. "Garrett," he called out. "Garrett Webb, can you hear me?" No response. The young man didn't move, didn't turn, didn't acknowledge us in any way. David circled around, rifle raised, until he could see Garrett's face. Then he stopped. "Weston," he said, his voice strange and flat. "Get the binding kit from the back of the truck. The one with the red tape on it." I found the kit, a canvas bag containing rope, salt, a bundle of sage, and several small pouches of herbs I couldn't identify. I brought it to David, staying behind him, using his body as a shield against whatever he was seeing. Then I looked at Garrett's face, and I understood. His eyes were open, but they weren't his eyes anymore. The irises had expanded to fill the entire visible surface, leaving nothing but two pools of deep, wet black that reflected the afternoon sky like oil slicks. His mouth was moving, shaping words without sound, repeating the same phrase over and over. "It's beautiful down there," David translated, reading the lip movements. "He keeps saying it's beautiful down there." "Can we help him?" David knelt beside Garrett, careful not to make contact with his skin. He held up a small mirror, angling it to catch Garrett's reflection. In the mirror, Garrett's face was different. His features shifted and writhed like something was moving beneath the skin, pressing outward, trying to break through. His reflected mouth opened too wide, revealing a darkness inside that seemed to go down forever. "He's too far gone," David said quietly. "The marking's complete. There's nothing left to cleanse." "So what do we do?" "The humane thing." David reached into the binding kit and pulled out a leather cord strung with small bone beads. "This will hold his body still while the change finishes. It won't save him, but it'll keep him from hurting anyone else, and it'll give us time to." He trailed off. We both knew what came next. We bound Garrett's wrists and ankles with the cord while he sat there, unresisting, his black eyes fixed on something we couldn't see. Then we loaded him into the truck bed and drove back to the compound. Dr. Sorensen was waiting at the gate. When she saw Garrett's condition, she nodded once as if confirming the hypothesis. "Take him to Building F," she said, "the secondary containment unit." "He's not a specimen," David growled. "He's a person. He worked for you. He was a person. Now he's a research opportunity." Dr. Sorensen's voice held no emotion, no regret. The transformation process has never been documented this thoroughly. If we can observe the full progression, we might learn something valuable. I watched David's hands tighten on his rifle. For a moment, I thought he might shoot her right there in the dusty compound yard. Then he let out a breath and turned away. "Come on, Weston. Nothing more we can do here." But I didn't follow him. Instead, I stepped closer to Dr. Sorensen, close enough to see the calculation behind her eyes. "You knew this would happen," I said. "You've been relaxing the protocols, letting things slip, waiting for someone to get marked." Her expression didn't change. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Weston." Garrett was scared of those things. He would never have gone outside the fence voluntarily. Someone convinced him it was safe. Someone gave him false information. I thought about the redacted files, the handwritten notes, the pattern of increasing incidents. How many others have you sacrificed for your research? Dr. Sorensen smiled. It was a thin, cold expression, that reminded me of the entity wearing Linda Begay's face. "You're smarter than most of the specialists we hire," she said. "That's unfortunate. Smart people ask questions, and questions are inconvenient." She turned and walked toward Building A, calling over her shoulder, "Your rotation ends in 4 months, Mr. Weston. I suggest you focus on survival rather than investigation. The latter tends to shorten the former considerably." That night, I broke into Dr. Sorensen's office. David kept watch while I searched her files, looking for anything that might explain what was really happening at Site 19. Most of the cabinets were locked, but I found a loose drawer behind her desk containing a folder marked Directive 7, Revised Parameters. Inside was a document that made my hands shake as I read it. Site 19 wasn't a containment facility. It was a farm. The entities fed on fear, on stress, on the psychological anguish of people trapped in proximity to something they couldn't understand. The protocols weren't designed to protect us. They were designed to maintain optimal terror levels without actually letting us escape or die too quickly. We were livestock, kept alive and frightened, so the things beneath the wellhead could feed on our suffering. And Dr. Sorensen wasn't just studying the entities. She was trying to breed them. The document referenced something called Project Emergence, an attempt to cultivate a new generation of entities using human hosts as incubators. Garrett wasn't the first. There had been others, volunteers from the early years, who thought they were helping with legitimate research. Their names were listed in clinical detail, along with the dates of their emergence and the characteristics of the offspring they produced. The most recent entry was dated 3 weeks ago, a successful emergence in building off secondary containment. The offspring was described as highly responsive to emotional stimuli and ready for field testing. I photographed every page with my phone, then returned the folder to its drawer. When I found David outside, his face told me he already suspected what I'd found. "How bad?" he asked. "Worse than we thought." I showed him the photos, watching his expression harden as he scrolled through the images. "She's been using this place to breed those things, using us as food and incubators." David handed the phone back to me. His scarred hands were steady, but his eyes burned with something I hadn't seen before. Not fear, not resignation, but cold, focused anger. "Then we end it," he said. "My grandfather taught me how to seal a breach. I've been waiting 8 years to use that knowledge. Now I know why." In Building F, Garrett Webb was screaming. The sound carried across the compound, high and thin, and no longer entirely human. "We're going to need help," I said. David nodded. "I know some people on the reservation, elders who remember the old stories, the real ceremonies. It'll take a few days to reach them without Sorensen noticing. And until then, we follow the protocols." His smile was grim. "We play the good little livestock, and we wait for our chance." The screening from Building F went on until nearly midnight. Then it stopped, replaced by something worse, a low, rhythmic humming that seemed to vibrate through the walls of every building in the compound. In my bunk, I lay awake and listened to the sound of something new being born. David left the compound 3 days later under the pretense of a supply run to Fort Duchesne. Dr. Sorensen approved the trip without suspicion. Staff were allowed 1 supervised visit to the reservation per rotation to maintain psychological stability. What she didn't know was that David had no intention of picking up supplies. I stayed behind, maintaining the routine, checking seals, counting cattle, pretending everything was normal. It was the hardest acting job of my life. The thing that had been Garrett Webb was still in Building F. I could hear it sometimes at night, not screaming anymore, but singing. A strange atonal melody that seemed to come from multiple throats at once, harmonizing with itself in ways that made my teeth ache. Dr. Sorensen spent hours in there with her recording equipment, documenting every sound, every movement, every stage of whatever Garrett was becoming. On the second night after David left, she called me into her office. "Sit down, Mr. Weston." I sat. The office was cluttered with files and equipment, smelling of stale coffee and something chemical. Formaldehyde, maybe, or one of the preservation compounds they used in Building F. Dr. Sorensen stood by the window, looking out at the dark compound through a gap in the steel shutters. "How much did David tell you about his grandfather?" she asked. I kept my face neutral. He mentioned he was a medicine man, knew some of the old traditions. Did he tell you that his grandfather tried to destroy this facility in 1973? That I hadn't known. I stayed silent, waiting. Joseph Antelope was his name. Respected elder, keeper of traditional knowledge, all that romantic nonsense. Dr. Sorensen turned from the window, her eyes sharp. He convinced himself that the entities could be banished permanently using Ute ceremonies, gathered a group of believers from the reservation, and attempted to seal the breach point with prayer, and herbs, and sacred objects. What happened? It worked, for about 6 hours. Her smile was thin. Then the seal broke and something came through that killed 14 people in under a minute. Joseph Antelope survived, but he was never the same. Spent his last years in a psychiatric facility in Provo, drawing pictures of things with too many limbs. She sat down across from me, close enough that I could see the web of red veins in her eyes. David thinks he can succeed where his grandfather failed. He's been planning something for years. I've known about it almost as long as he has. The elders he's meeting today will tell him the same thing Joseph learned the hard way. You can't fight these entities with superstition. They're not demons or spirits. They're a biological phenomenon, and the only way to manage them is through science. Then why keep us here? I asked. If science is the answer, why use people as bait? Dr. Sorensen's expression didn't change. Because fear is a resource, Mr. Weston. The entities consume it, and consumption can be measured, studied, predicted. Every person we bring to Site 19 is a data point. Every death is a learning opportunity. It's not pleasant, but progress rarely is. Garrett Webb wasn't a data point. He was a 26-year-old kid from Provo who wanted to pay off his student loans. Garrett Webb is now the most successful emergent subject we've ever produced. She leaned forward. In 3 days, he'll complete his transformation. In a week, we'll begin field tests to determine his capabilities. In a month, we might have answers to questions that have plagued this program for decades. Her voice dropped. His sacrifice will save lives, Mr. Weston. Many more lives than he could have touched in his original form. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell her that she was insane, that nothing justified what she was doing, that the entities weren't a resource to be harvested, but a plague to be eradicated. Instead, I nodded and said, "I understand." Dr. Sorensen studied me for a long moment. Whatever she saw in my face seemed to satisfy her. "Good. I'm glad we have this talk. I'd hate for David's delusions to infect someone with actual potential." She waved toward the door. "You're dismissed. And Mr. Weston, if David contacts you with any alternative plans, I expect you to inform me immediately. It's for his own safety, as much as anyone's." I walked out of her office with my heart pounding against my ribs. David returned the next evening, his truck loaded with actual supplies, canned goods, ammunition, medical kits. Nothing that would arouse suspicion. But when he found me at the fire pit after dark, his eyes held a light I hadn't seen before. "They remember," he said, keeping his voice low. "The elders remember what my grandfather tried to do, and they know why it failed." Dr. Sorensen told me about 1973. She said the seal only held for 6 hours. David nodded. Because he did it wrong. Not the ceremony itself. That part was correct. But he tried to close the breach from above, pushing against the pressure of whatever's down there. It was like trying to cap a geyser with your hand. He pulled a small leather bundle from inside his jacket. The elders taught me the right way. You don't close the breach from above. You go down into it and close it from within. Go down into it, into the cavern. There's an access point. The original drill shaft, sealed with concrete in 1951, but never completely destroyed. It's beneath Building F. That's why they built the research lab there. They've been using it to study what comes up, but the shaft itself still exists. I thought about the singing I'd heard from Building F, the thing that used to be Garrett crooning in its new voice. Even if we can reach the shaft, how do we get past whatever's guarding it? David opened the leather bundle. Inside were several small pouches, a carved bone knife, and a braided cord decorated with feathers and beads. Everything smelled of sage and earth and something older, something that made the air feel thick. The ceremony requires 3 things, David said. First, the materials: salt from the Great Salt Lake, white ash from lightning-struck cedar, tobacco blessed by an elder. I have all of those now. He touched each pouch as he named it. Second, the knowledge. The words and movements my grandfather taught me before he was taken to the hospital. I've carried them in my memory for 30 years. And the third thing? David's expression grew somber. Someone has to stay at the breach point while the seal forms. The ceremony takes time, maybe an hour, maybe more. During that time, everything below will try to stop it. Whatever is down there will throw everything it has at the person performing the ritual. You're talking about a suicide mission. I'm talking about ending this. Permanently. David tied the bundle closed and tucked it back into his jacket. My grandfather failed because he tried to do it from outside. He survived because he wasn't at the center when the seal broke. If I do this right, there won't be anything left to break through. But I'll be on the wrong side when it closes. David, I've made my peace with it, Weston. I've been making my peace with it for 8 years. He put a hand on my shoulder. What I need from you is to make sure I get the chance. Dr. Sorensen knows something's happening. She'll try to stop us. I need you to keep her occupied while I reach the shaft. How am I supposed to do that? The research data. Everything she's collected over the past 70 years. The emergence records, the breeding protocols, Project Emergence. It's all stored in Building A, in a server room behind her office. If that data were to be destroyed, it would set back her work by decades, maybe permanently. I understood what he was asking. Not just a distraction, but a destruction. Burning everything Dr. Sorensen had built, every file and recording and specimen, while David descended into the dark to seal the door forever. When? I asked. Tomorrow night. There's a gap in the security rotation between 2 and 3 in the morning. Tommy owes me a favor, and he'll make sure the cameras in Building F loop for an hour. That's my window to reach the shaft. David squeezed my shoulder. You'll need to move fast. Once Sorensen realizes what's happening, she'll call for backup. There's a government response team stationed in Vernal, about 90 minutes out. You'll have that long to destroy the data and get clear of the compound. And then you drive to Fort Duchesne and tell my cousin Eleanor what happened. She'll make sure the tribe claims the land as sacred territory. It'll create enough legal barriers to keep the government from rebuilding. I looked at the fire, watching the sage smoke curl toward the stars. Somewhere in the darkness, something called out in a voice that almost sounded human. You really think this will work? I asked. David's smile was tired but certain. My grandfather was a wise man, but he was afraid. He tried to close the door gently, carefully, without sacrifice. He learned that some doors only close from the inside. David stood up, brushing ash from his jeans. "I'm not afraid anymore, Weston. I've been living with these things for 8 years. Dying to end them seems like a fair trade." He walked back toward the barracks, leaving me alone with the fire and the weight of what was coming. Tomorrow night, one way or another, Site 19 would burn. At 1:47 a.m., I left the barracks with a jerry can of gasoline and a lighter in my pocket. The compound was quiet. A thin moon hung over the book cliffs, casting silver light across the gravel yard. The floodlights were on their usual rotation, sweeping the perimeter in predictable arcs. I knew the pattern by heart now. 6 weeks of watching had burned it into my memory. David was already moving toward Building F, his silhouette briefly visible against the pale concrete before he slipped around the corner and disappeared. Tommy had done his part. The cameras would show nothing but empty hallways for the next hour. I crossed to Building A, staying in the shadows between the floodlight sweeps. The door was locked, but David had given me a copy of the master key, something he'd duplicated years ago, waiting for exactly this moment. Inside, the building smelled like old paper and machine oil. Dr. Sorensen's office was at the end of the hall, and behind it, the server room that held 70 years of data on Project Emergence. I found the server room without trouble. Rows of humming machines filled the space, their status lights blinking green and amber in the darkness. File cabinets lined the walls, stuffed with paper records going back to 1951. Everything Dr. Sorensen had built, everything she'd sacrificed lives to learn, was contained in this room. I started with the gasoline. I splashed it across the file cabinets, over the server towers, along the floor and the trail leading back to the door. The fumes made my eyes water and my head spin. Then I heard the singing. It came from somewhere below me, muffled by concrete and earth, but still audible. The same atonal melody I'd heard from Building F, but different now. Deeper. More voices joining in, harmonizing in patterns that seemed to twist the air itself. David had reached the shaft. I pulled out the lighter, but before I could strike it, the lights came on. "I warned you about asking questions, Mr. Weston." Dr. Sorensen stood in the doorway, a pistol in her hand. She looked tired but unsurprised, as if she'd been expecting this moment for a long time. "Step away from the servers." "You can't stop what's happening," I said. "David's already below. By the time your response team gets here, the breach will be sealed." "The breach has been open for 74 years. It's not going to close because one man with a bag of herbs decides to play medicine man." She gestured with the pistol. "Move." I didn't move. "You heard the singing change. Something's different down there. The ceremony is working." For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across her face. She tilted her head, listening. The singing had grown louder, more frantic, discordant notes creeping in as if whatever was producing the sound was struggling against something. "That's not possible," she said. Joseph Antelope tried the same thing in 1973. The entities broke through in 6 hours. Joseph tried to close it from above. David's doing it from inside. Dr. Sorensen's eyes widened. The pistol wavered slightly. "He's in the cavern? That's suicide. Nothing human survives down there for more than a few minutes. He knows." The singing stopped. For a moment, the silence was absolute. No hum of servers, no creak of the building settling, no sound at all. Then the ground shuddered. It wasn't an earthquake. It was something pressing upward from below, pushing against the seal David was trying to create. I felt it in my bones, in my teeth, in the hollow space behind my eyes where fear lives. Dr. Sorensen stumbled. I lunged for the lighter. The shot went wide, punching through a server tower in a spray of sparks. I hit the floor, rolled, and came up with the lighter in my hand. The flame caught on the first try. "Don't," Dr. Sorensen said. The pistol was aimed at my chest now, her hand steadier. "Everything I've worked for is in this room. Every answer to every question about what those things are and how they function. You destroy this, and humanity loses its best chance to understand. Humanity doesn't need to understand them. Humanity needs them gone." I dropped the lighter. The gasoline caught with a whoosh of heat and light. Flames raced across the floor, climbing the file cabinets, engulfing the server towers. Dr. Sorensen screamed something I couldn't hear over the roar of the fire, and then she was running, fleeing down the hallway toward the exit. I followed her out, coughing on smoke, my skin tight from the heat. Behind me, Building A was becoming an inferno. The compound was chaos. Staff members were emerging from barracks, shouting questions, staring at the flames. Ray and Paul were trying to organize a bucket line from the water tanks. Tommy stood frozen near the cattle pen, watching the sky. I looked up and saw why. The stars were wrong. They swirled in slow spirals like water draining from a bathtub, centered on a point directly above the wellhead to the south. The air itself seemed to bend toward that point, pulled by something immense and hungry, trying to claw its way through. Then the spiraling stopped. The stars snapped back to their proper positions with an almost audible click. And from beneath the earth came a sound I'll never forget. A scream that wasn't a scream. A howl that wasn't a howl. Something vast and ancient and furious being cut off mid-cry. The ground heaved once, twice, and then went still. The singing didn't resume. I ran toward Building F. The door was open, the security seals broken. Inside, the halls were dark and smelled of copper and sage. I followed the scent to the secondary containment unit, where Garrett Webb had been held. The unit was empty. The glass walls of the containment cell were shattered outward, and something dark and wet stained the floor. Not blood, but something thicker, blacker, already evaporating in the air like morning dew. A hatch in the floor stood open. Concrete stairs descended into darkness. I found the flashlight on my belt and went down. The stairs went deeper than I expected. 50 feet, 100, more. The walls changed from concrete to bare rock, then to something smoother, older, carved by hands that weren't human. Symbols covered every surface, pictographs that seemed to move in the flashlight beam, telling stories I couldn't read and didn't want to understand. At the bottom was a chamber. And in the center of the chamber, seated on the bare stone floor, was David. He was alive. Barely. The leather bundle lay open beside him, its contents scattered and burned. The bone knife was embedded in the stone floor at the center of a circle, drawn in white ash, and from that circle radiated lines of salt and sacred tobacco, forming a pattern that covered the entire chamber floor. David's arms were covered in wounds, deep gouges that looked like claw marks, bites that showed too many teeth. His face was pale, his breathing shallow, but his eyes were open and aware. "It's done," he said. His voice was barely a whisper. "The door is closed." I knelt beside him, trying to assess the damage. The wounds were severe, but not immediately fatal. If I could get him to the surface, to medical care. "Don't." He caught my wrist with surprising strength. "I need to stay. The seal requires an anchor, something living, tied to both sides. If I leave, it reopens. David, you'll die down here. Eventually." He smiled, and despite everything, it was peaceful. But not today. Not for a while, I think. The ceremony, it changed something. I can feel the boundary now, feel it holding. As long as I'm here, as long as I remember the words, it stays closed. Above us, I heard shouting. Sirens. the response team arriving from Vernal. "Go," David said. "Find Eleanor. Tell her what happened. The tribe will protect this place. They've been protecting sacred sites for thousands of years. This is just one more. I can't leave you here alone." "I'm not alone." His eyes drifted to the walls, to the symbols that danced in the dying flashlight beam. "My grandfather is here. The elders who taught me. Everyone who ever tried to close this door." His grip on my wrist loosened. "Go, Weston. Finish what we started. Burn it all down and make sure no one ever digs here again." I climbed back up the stairs with tears cutting through the soot on my face. By the time I reached the surface, Building A had collapsed into smoldering rubble. Building F was burning too. Someone had spread the fire, whether by accident or design. Staff members were fleeing toward the gates, abandoning the compound. Dr. Sorensen was nowhere to be seen. I walked to the parking area, found a truck with keys in the ignition, and drove through the gate without looking back. In the rearview mirror, Site 19 glowed orange against the dark Utah sky. The road to Fort Duchesne stretched empty before me. Behind me, the fire burned until dawn. The government tried to prosecute us. Destruction of federal property, arson, theft of classified materials, obstruction of national security research. The charges filled 17 pages. Eleanor Antelope, David's cousin, was ready for them. She filed a counterclaim the same week, asserting that Site 19 had been built on land stolen from the Ute tribe in 1949 through fraudulent treaty amendments. The legal battle dragged on for 2 years, bouncing between federal courts and tribal councils, generating enough paperwork to fill a warehouse. In the end, a compromise was reached. The land was returned to the Northern Ute Nation as protected sacred territory, and all charges against me were quietly dropped in exchange for my silence. I testified once in a closed session about what Dr. Sorensen had done. The full truth never came out. It couldn't, not without admitting that the United States government had spent 70 years farming human terror to feed things from beneath the earth. But enough of my testimony leaked to the right people. Project Emergence was shut down. The funding disappeared. Dr. Sorensen vanished into whatever bureaucratic hole swallows disgraced researchers with too many secrets. I moved to Helper, a small town in Carbon County where nobody asked questions about my past. Got a job at a hardware store. Started attending meetings at the community center on Thursday nights, talking to other people who'd seen things they couldn't explain. Utah has more of us than you'd think. Last spring, I drove back to the Winta Basin for the first time since the fire. The fence was gone. The concrete foundations of the buildings had been broken up and hauled away, leaving nothing but bare earth and scattered stones. Wildflowers had taken root in the ash. Indian paintbrush and desert marigold, their colors startling against the brown scrubland. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals that rose from the warming ground. David was waiting for me near where the observation tower used to stand. He looked older than I remembered. His hair shot through with gray. New scars layered over the old ones on his arms. But his eyes were clear and calm, holding a peace I'd never seen in them before. "You came," he said. "Couldn't stay away forever?" We walked together to the wellhead. The concrete cap was still there, but someone had built a small structure around it. A circular shelter of cedar posts and woven branches, decorated with feathers and beads and bundles of dried sage. Offerings lay scattered at the base, tobacco ties, carved stones, photographs of people I didn't recognize. "The elders come 4 times a year," David explained. "Solstices and equinoxes. We perform the renewal ceremony, reinforce the seal, remember what's below." He knelt and touched the concrete, his scarred fingers tracing patterns I couldn't see. "They're still down there, sleeping there, dreaming in the dark. But they'll wake up if we forget." "Will you ever be free of this place?" David considered the question for a long moment. Wind rustled through the sagebrush, carrying the scent of cedar smoke from somewhere distant. My grandfather spent his whole life trying to close this door, he finally said. He died thinking he'd failed. But he didn't fail. He taught me, and I taught others, and now there are people who will remember long after I'm gone. He stood, brushing dust from his knees. That's not a burden, Weston. That's a gift. We stayed until sunset, watching the shadows stretch across the basin. The land felt different now. Not safe exactly, but settled, balanced, like something that had been wrong for a very long time was finally starting to heal. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. David stood alone among the wildflowers, his hand raised in farewell, keeping watch over the door that must never be opened again. Some places hold memory in the soil. Some wounds only heal if someone stays to tend them. And some doors, once closed, require a guardian to keep them shut forever.